Hey guys, welcome back to the M3D Life podcast, and today we are talking everything Ryder Cup. We are going to get into the history of the event, the previous wins, previous moments, and build up to this 2025 Ryder Cup at Bethpage Black in New York. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. I thought we would start off this episode going into a little bit of the history of the Ryder Cup. If you're like myself, I know a few moments. I've obviously grown up playing golf, grown up watching the Ryder Cup, such an iconic sporting event. Arguably, maybe the best event in golf, maybe top two, you could say. Ryder Cup, Masters, you definitely have to say it's up there. Such an iconic event and so unique in the format, the match play, Europe versus the US, etc. So the first event was played back in 1927, and it was the US versus Great Britain. Now, Europe joined in 1979, and a fun fact for you guys is Mr. Ryder was actually a seed merchant and donated the trophy. Now, that might be one of the best ways to get your name on a piece of history that I've ever heard. Donate a trophy, and all of a sudden you have one of the biggest events in golf named after you. That is pretty incredible. I wish I'd donated a trophy back in those days. I have no idea how much it would have cost. I'm sure it wasn't cheap, but you have your name as a part of history now. The Ryder Cup from Mr. Ryder, a seed merchant donating a trophy. I thought that was a really fun fact that I came across. Let me know in the comments if you guys already knew that. Now, overall, there's a little bit of bias about the Ryder Cup because at the start, it wasn't 100% always the most competitive event. Overall, the US leads with 27 wins to Europe's only won 14 of them. Now, on the surface of that sounds like the US has been incredibly dominant, but we know that's actually not the case because since 1979, Europe has won 11 and the US has only won 9. So Europe really have somewhat dominated the Ryder Cup since 1979, since Europe joined Great Britain and Ireland, and now the Ryder Cup is what we know it. And I think one of the things that makes the Ryder Cup so great is it's almost always competitive because there's so many points up for grabs on the last day. Pretty much anything could happen. We've seen the miracle at Medina where Europe came back massively on the last day to win. So it really isn't over until it's over, until you've holed that winning putt, until you've got that final point. Really anything could happen, and I think that is one of the key things that makes the Ryder Cup so great. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Now, in 2021, we saw the biggest winning margin in Ryder Cup history, with the US winning 19-9 points over Europe. And we kind of thought, oh, this is the new US team. They are going to come out and dominate every single year. They won by so many. We had the emergence of Scotty Scheffler beating Jon Rahm, who was the #1 player in the world at the time. And it's not really gone that way at all. I think it's pretty safe to say Europe seems to have a little bit of an edge on us at the Ryder Cup. They have a completely different setup with their team. I think it's pretty safe to say we need to start learning a lot from the European team. They do their stats better. They have a completely different point system when it comes to actually selecting those final captain's picks than the US does. The US places quite a lot of emphasis, I believe, on major championships. So your performance in major championships is weighted quite a lot higher than other events. I don't believe that's the case from everything I know about the European system. I believe they have a bit more of an even spread across events, which you can't really argue with. Seems to have done them a great deal of service in their performance in the Ryder Cup. And, you know, the last Ryder Cup, I wouldn't say was 100% the best. In Italy, yes, we had some absolutely fiery moments with Joey LaCava, Patrick Cantlay's caddy, and who previously caddied for Tiger Woods, who's a pretty feisty, fiery, New York, passionate guy, versus obviously Rory McIlroy, who we know gets pretty hot under the collar, and also Shane Lowry as well, two fiery Irishmen. And we all know what happened there. I've seen a lot of people talking about, is there going to be some pushing and shoving? Are there going to be any fights? Are we going to get Hatgate 2.0 at this Ryder Cup? If you aren't familiar with Hatgate, it's the whole Patrick Cantlay, slightly Xander Schauffele type issue over wearing the hat versus not wearing the hat. The rumor was that Patrick Cantlay, I believe, and Xander Schauffele a little bit, were not happy that they're basically not being paid for this event, which I can kind of understand, because you know what? There's a hell of a lot of people making a hell of a lot of money from this, and yet the players aren't. I completely get it. You're playing for your country. You're not playing for money, etc., etc. It's a team event. It's the history. But when you have all these businessmen, when you have the PGA of America, when you have the European Tour and all these people making millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions on this sporting event off the back of the players, is it fair that they're not compensated really? Well, probably not in my mind. Of course, that has changed, and the players are now given a bit of a stipend, which they can donate to charity and things. So there's a little bit of a bridge there, but it was noted that in Keegan Bradley's press conference that Patrick Cantlay, again, was not wearing the hat. So it will be very, very interesting to certainly see how that storyline develops going into the 2025 Ryder Cup. There was also issues with Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele having their own changing room or not kind of mixing in with the rest of the crowd. And I think it's safe to say that that is one thing Europe seems to have done a lot better in, or at least that's what we get told, is they have a bit more team camaraderie, which is actually surprising, to be honest, because they're playing, when you think about it, for multiple countries across multiple continents, whereas, you know, the USA is all under one country, under one flag. So it's kind of actually surprising that you would think it would be the other way around. You would think Europe, with speaking different languages, with coming from different cultures, different backgrounds, would have more diversity and struggle to get that team spirit more than the US would. But that seemingly is not the case. And the reason why, well, certainly the reason why a lot of people talk about it is because they say European golfers grow up playing a lot more team golf. USA is much more individualized, and it's something I've heard from players who have come from Europe going to play in the USA. And, you know, this has been reported quite heavily. Players like Thomas Pieters has spoken out about this, where he said when he came from Europe to play in the USA, he felt very isolated. No one, you know, was speaking to him. No one was interacting, engaging with him. There was no camaraderie. There was no friendship, really. It was a very high-level competitive environment, which is what you would expect. But on the European Tour, I think it is a little bit more friendly. Players tend to go for dinner with each other, maybe a little bit more so. The US PGA Tour seems to be a little bit more cliquey, a little bit more, you know, you've got the college golfers who grew up playing together and stuff. Players like, you know, Justin Thomas, Jordan Spieth, Ricky Fowler, who are all, you know, very, very close friends. But on the European side, you know, there seems to be a bit more socializing. The US side seems to stay in their kind of friendship bubbles in those cliques, and it seems to be a bit more isolated, maybe a little bit more competitive as well. So moving on, only 3 points separate the US versus Europe over the history of the Ryder Cup. Only 3 points. Now, when you think about it, that's pretty crazy. That was a stat I came across, and to be honest with you, I'm assuming that stat is from 1979 onwards. I don't think that stat is from 1927. I believe that would be since it's been Europe versus the US. that there's only 3 points separating, and that is Europe leads by 3 points. And that is pretty crazy when you think of how many Ryder Cups there's been, when you think of, I guess the US would have gotten quite a lot of points back on Europe in that tally, in that leaderboard in 2021 at Whistling Straits, the 19-9 margin. And obviously this year we are going to be at Bethpage Black. Bethpage Black, New York, iconic, brutally difficult golf course, set to just be an unbelievable host venue for the Ryder Cup. I'm sure we will see a huge amount of drama. New York crowds getting very rowdy. I certainly wouldn't want to be a European player playing in those environments. It's going to get definitely heated. Let me know in the comments below. Do you think there's going to be a fight? Do you think there's going to be some pushing? Do you think things will go a little bit too far? Do you think some of the crowd members, some of the patrons might have to be escorted out? It will be a very hostile, very tense environment for the European team. That is for certain. The crowd, I think, will play a really big part. It's obviously a long golf course, very difficult, kind of a bomber's style of golf course, which we would think would suit the US team quite heavily. That would be my assumption. You know, that's been the history of how the PGA has set up its home events, is they've created these bombers style golf courses, which is absolutely fair. But I do think if you look at the teams, there's a lot less difference in the style of players you have on each team. Maybe in the previous history, the European team were a little bit more accurate, but a little bit shorter off the tee, a little bit shorter hitters distance-wise. Whereas the US team were long bombers and liked big open wide fairways, etc. I don't think that's the case. You have, you know, some players on the US side who are not the longest hitters this year. People like JJ Spawn, for example, who's had an unbelievable year. And then you have players on the European side who are exceptionally long hitters. And that's just the way the game's gone over the previous years is, you know, if you want to be successful, it's been shown you have to hit the ball a long way, whether you're playing in Europe, whether you're playing in the US, that's just something you have to do. So it's a skill set that these young European players like Ludwig Oberg, for example, have really built and developed and curated themselves. So I don't think distance is going to be nearly as big an issue, but please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. So, something to mention, I'm going to be in New York when the Ryder Cup is being hosted, just coincidentally, and I am currently trying to get a hold of tickets. They currently sit at about $1,000 from what I've seen online, and that's about £750 roughly. Now, I'm in two minds. I'm trying to get tickets from my agent and through the PGA and proper channels. If I don't get some free tickets, then I have a bit of a dilemma. Do I pay that money for those tickets, or do I not? Or do I say, you know what, I don't want to pay that much. That's a lot of money. And yeah, I'm not really sure what to do at the moment. I'm kind of currently leaning towards, if it gets like a week or 2 weeks out, I think I might buy some tickets. The reason because that, even though it is a lot of money, it's a huge amount of money for a sporting event. I mean, that is one of the highest prices you would pay for a general entry ticket to any sporting event. It's Bethpage Black, it's the Ryder Cup, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I think I might do it. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Should I buy tickets? Would you pay that amount for tickets? The history of the tickets is actually really interesting because the host basically sets the ticket price. So when it's in Europe, the European Tour sets the ticket price. When it's in, you know, the US, the PGA of America sets the ticket price. So the last event in Italy, the tickets were only about £200. Now they're about $750. That's a pretty big difference, more than, you know, 350% difference in ticket prices. So let me know, would you guys be willing to pay that, and do you think I should as well? One of the things as well that I've been thinking, because we've developed this issue in the Ryder Cup where it's very, very, very difficult and very, very unlikely for a away team to win the Ryder Cup. So it's very difficult for the European team to win in America. It's very difficult for the American team to win in Europe. Part of that is obviously crowd plays a massive role, and part of that is course setup. Now, would you like to see a neutral host party set up the golf course? Because at the moment, the European Tour does a huge amount of research with analytics and sets up the golf course how it best thinks its players, it would favor its own players, and the PGA does the same for the US players. Absolutely fair. But it's created this issue where we very, very, very rarely see an away team win the Ryder Cup. And it's got me thinking, should we have some neutral third party that is, setting up the golf course in a fair way? You're still going to have the advantage of the home crowds, so it's still going to be difficult to win away. But it seems like it's maybe gotten too difficult. I think it would be a more interesting event if we did see Europe win America or America win in Europe a little bit more often, just so it wasn't so one-sided like what happened in 2021. Now, that is rare. It's normally a lot closer to that. But still, if you look at the history of the previous 20 years, there's only been maybe 2 events that have been won on away soil. Everything else is won on home soil. So that is one of the things I've been wrestling with. Now, Bryson DeChambeau made some very interesting comments, because Live Golf season has finished. And he's got, he's playing in the Ryder Cup, and he's got quite a long time to wait until the next season, until the Ryder Cup, in between the last Live event. Now, there are a few PGA Tour events, and he expressed his interest in wanting to play those events in, preparation for the Ryder Cup, and he kind of put some of the blame on the PGA Tour for not allowing them to play in those events. Now, the PGA Tour doesn't really have anything to do with the Ryder Cup. I mean, yes, there's some affiliation there. There are PGA Tour members who compete in it, and there's a lot of linkage behind the scenes and relationships, but it is a different organization to the PGA of America, who is in charge of hosting the Ryder Cup in the US and in charge of the US Ryder Cup team. So let me know what you guys should think. Should the PGA Tour be letting live golfers like Bryson DeChambeau, who are playing in the Ryder Cup, should they let them practice in preparation and play in those events? Or, should they not? They don't have any obligation to. It doesn't seem like they're going to. I would be exceptionally surprised if that changed. It would open the floodgates for, basically any live golfer to go back and play a PGA Tour event. And at the end of the day, the Ryder Cup doesn't really have anything to do with the PGA Tour, more or less. So it will be very, very interesting, though, because that was one of the previous mistakes that happened in Rome in the last Ryder Cup in Italy, was the US team basically had no preparation. They basically took a holiday after the FedEx Cup ended and didn't play any golf, and we saw how rusty they were and everything that happened in Italy. Now, I don't think that's going to happen again. I hope it doesn't happen again, because it's kind of a bit stupid, really, and it's kind of a bit, I don't know, you could call it selfish or just lack of preparedness, or like, if you don't want to prepare for the event, if you don't care that much about it, that you're going to take some holiday time and you're not going to take it seriously as an event, maybe you shouldn't be playing in it. Maybe, you should just withdraw your name and let someone else play in it, because there's a hell of a lot of people who are very, very passionate about this event and would absolutely die to play in it. Now, before we wrap up this episode, and I feel like we've rattled through a lot of topics in this episode, so if you have enjoyed it, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, wherever you are listening to this. But I want to dive into Keegan Bradley, the US Ryder Cup captain, a young captain. Obviously, Tiger Woods was asked to be the US Ryder Cup captain this year in Bethpage Black. He politely declined for whatever reason, said he had a lot going on and, wasn't willing to give up the time, because it is a huge commitment to be the US Ryder Cup captain. But Keegan Bradley has had a great year as a player, still, performing very well. And there was a lot of controversy of, is he going to play in the US Ryder Cup team and be a playing captain? Now, that is not the case. He did not end up picking himself. I think that was probably the safe decision, because if he picks himself and either he doesn't play well, or the team doesn't play well, or they lose, one of those three scenarios, he is going to get massively blamed for that. And we have Luke Donald as the European Ryder Cup captain, and for the second time in a row, which hasn't happened very often. Typically, captains only do it once, because it is such a huge burden, a huge responsibility, I guess you could say, that takes place over years, that they have to do a huge amount of work for behind the scenes, meetings, events, publicity, loads of stuff goes on behind the scenes for basically 2 or 3 years before the actual Ryder Cup takes place. So it's really interesting that Luke Donald is doing it 2 times in a row. I think that gives Europe a bit more of an advantage, because if you're doing something for the second time, I'm sure Luke Donald learned a huge amount about being the Ryder Cup captain from his first captaincy, and I'm sure there's a lot of information he will take into this Ryder Cup captaincy, whereas the US side has Keegan Bradley, who's, it's his first time doing it, so he's a little bit younger, a little bit less experienced in that sort of Ryder Cup captaincy role. So I think they've maybe chosen Keegan Bradley because they're maybe thinking, could he take that role into future events as well? Would he be the Ryder Cup captain at one of the next events? I believe the next Ryder Cup is in Adair Manor in Ireland, I believe. There was also talk about, is Tiger Woods going to be captain that event, because he has a lot of ties to that place. So it's going to be very interesting to see the 2 different styles of captaincy. Luke Donald, kind of this quieter, still very passionate guy, incredible golfer, obviously, made it to world #1, won both, order of money lists on the European Tour and PGA Tour in a year, which is incredible. But a bit quieter. Keegan Bradley, a little bit more passionate, a little bit more fiery, you could say, kind of a Boston guy, so can get, pretty heated at times, and, has shown how passionate he is about this event in, Netflix's Full Swing and various other events. So let me know in the comments below, who do you think is going to win the 2025 Ryder Cup at Bethpage Black? And thank you guys for watching. Make sure you do like this, subscribe, comment your thoughts wherever you are watching this. I really appreciate it. We'll have many more episodes coming out very soon for you guys, so thank you for watching.